Packs did not collapse at the moment of betrayal. They decayed in quieter places first, where duty turned theatrical, where oaths were repeated long after they stopped meaning anything, where grief became a currency the powerful could spend. Guinevere Ironhold had watched that rot spread through halls she once scrubbed with her own hands, through councils where no one met her gaze, through feast tables where silence replaced blessing when she entered. By the night her mate died, she understood the underlying truth with a precision that made breathing hurt. A kingdom can keep its walls, its banners, its laws, and still become a graveyard long before the dead are counted. The courtyard stones were slick with sleet and torch runoff when she saw Dane fall. She did not hear the blades strike, only the abrupt roughness in his breath and the wet collapse of his weight as Cain Ironhold stepped in close, too close, as if embracing a brother instead of gutting him from behind. Dane had turned at the wrong moment, reaching toward her where she stood under the awning with one hand braced at the small, firm swell beneath her ribs. Cain's mouth had curved with triumph, not rage, and that was what froze her first. Planned, not frenzy. His wolves formed a ring as Dane went to his knees, and none of them moved to help. "Look at me," Dane had rasped to her, voice breaking on ice-cold air. "Run, Gwyn, Marsh Pass, go now." She had taken one step. A guard seized her by the forearm, fingers digging into old scar tissue until bright pain rang through her bones. Cain crouched beside Dain, ripped the iron signet from his hand, and lifted it to the torchlight like a war prize. The ring still held Dane's heat. Guinevere saw that absurdly, vividly, as if detail might save him if she memorized enough of him. Cain rose and faced the gathered pack. "Witness this. The weak line ends tonight. The widow carries an heir, and that heir belongs to Ironhold under my command." Dane tried to lunge and failed. Cain kicked him down. No one protested. The guard's grip tightened. Guinevere swallowed metal-tasting panic and forced herself to breathe through her nose. Steady. Quiet. The way Dane had trained her in winter hunts when prey could hear fear. She counted heartbeats against nausea. One for herself. One for the pup. One for the lie she needed to wear until she could move. "Bring her to the hall," Cain ordered. "Alive. If she bites, break her jaw. I need her speaking at the claim-right." A low laugh ran through the ring. Not all of them laughed, but enough did. She twisted just enough to retch beside the steps. The guard cursed and loosened his hold in disgust. She sagged as if fainting. Then she drove her heel down on his instep, ripped free, and stumbled into Cain's side as wolves surged to grab her. Dane's signet, looped through a leather tie at Cain's belt, caught on her torn sleeve. She wrenched hard, felt metal come loose into her palm, shoved it into her bodice, and ran. A spear shaft clipped her shoulder as she cut past the smokehouse. Someone shouted, "North Wall?" Another answered, "No, the stables." She took neither route. Dain had mapped every blind angle with her over 2 years, half in tenderness and half in paranoia, because Cain was kin and therefore dangerous in ways strangers were not. She vaulted the drainage trench, slid through nettles, and dove behind the old grain mill where stones leaned at broken angles. Her lungs burned. The pup fluttered low in her belly, not a kick yet, only presence, a small insistence of life that steadied her better than courage ever had. If I stop moving, he cages us. If he cages us, he names our child property. Keep going. By moonset, she had reached the outer deer runs with mud to her thighs and sleet turning to hard, dry snow. Behind her, a howl rolled across the valley, deep and carrying. Cain's voice threaded into command. It was answered by 3 patrol lines in sequence, the old military pattern for coordinated pursuit. They were not searching at random. They were driving her. "Bring her back alive!" Cain's voice came again, amplified by the winter bowl of hills. "Take the child. End the Ironhold line under my rule." Her knees shook so hard she nearly fell. She bit the inside of her cheek and tasted salt and copper, grounding herself in sensation rather than terror. She could not outrun mounted wolves on open ground. She needed water, reed cover, unstable earth that would slow heavier bodies. The Marsh Pass. The pass was less a road than a wound through frozen bog, marked by dead cedar poles wrapped in faded blue cloth. Dane had shown it to her in autumn, laughing when she swore at leeches and sinking boots. "No commander uses it," he had said. "Too ugly. Which is why you remember it." Now ugliness became salvation. She splashed through black water capped with skin-thin ice, each step a gamble between solid root and hidden depth. Mud sucked at her boots until one came half off. She yanked it free and kept going. Reeds whipped her face. A branch tore her cloak from shoulder to hem, leaving cold knifing across sweat-damp skin. She clutched the hunting knife at her belt, useless against a full patrol but vital as promise. I am not going gentle into his cage. At the narrowest bend, she heard them behind her, close enough for breath and armor clink. "There!" a male voice barked. "By the marker stone." Another voice, female and amused, called, "Guinevere, stop running. Cain says he will be kind if you kneel." Kind. The word almost made her laugh. She dropped flat into reed shadow as two wolves splashed past on the higher track, hunting by sight, not scent, because marsh gas and stagnant channels confused even trained noses. She stayed submerged to the chin, shivering, counting slowly while cramps twisted her lower abdomen. Fear surged hard and sharp. Not now. Please, not now. She pressed both palms over her belly and breathed through the spasm until it eased into dull ache. Minutes stretched. The patrol moved ahead. She crawled from the water, teeth chattering, and forced herself forward. 3 days earlier, she had still believed patience could preserve peace long enough for her pup to be born under law. She had endured Cain's public insults, his staged condolences, his council summons meant to humiliate. Because Dane asked for restraint while he gathered proof of embezzled tribute and false border reports. She had believed institutions could hold. She had believed elders would honor blood oath over convenience. Then the elders stood in a circle and watched Dane die. The breaking point was not only murder. It was consensus. Near dawn, she reached the low ridge where Ironhold stones ended and Windrider cairns began, stacked slate towers crusted white, each carved with spiral runes for truce, witness, and shelter under challenge law. Windrider territory. Enemy once, rival always, and recently ruled by a king whose campaigns had made nurses whisper and generals boast. Nikolai Windrider, the ruthless one. The one even Cain avoided in open dispute. Guinevere staggered to the first cairn and dropped to both knees. She tore Dane's signet from inside her bodice where she had hidden it after the courtyard and clenched it so hard the edges cut her palm. Warmth spread between her fingers. She lifted her bleeding hand and pressed it to the stone rune for witness. "My name is Guinevere Ironhold," she said into wind gone pale with mourning. Her voice shook but did not crack. "Widow under blood law, carrying lawful heir. I claim border asylum and trial protection." No answer came except the long sigh of pines, then hoofbeats. Not many. Disciplined spacing. She tried to rise and failed. Her vision tunneled, narrowed to boots dismounting on frost and the creak of leather. Wolves circled at a distance, silent. She expected a blade at her throat, a formal refusal, a courier sent to trade her back for concessions. Her body had nothing left to bargain with anyway. She drew the knife and held it across her lap because surrender without terms was how women vanished. A man stepped into her blurred field of view, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in dark wool and fur with no jeweled insignia, only authority worn like gravity. When he crouched, she caught his scent through marsh filth and blood. Rain over stone, pine resin, winter smoke. Not threat first. Home and storm together, which made no sense and frightened her more than steel. His gaze locked on hers, and amber bled into his irises, the predator surfacing for one held breath before discipline pulled it back. Claws edged from his fingertips and withdrew. Behind him, his patrol stood rigid, stunned by whatever they saw moving across his face. He lowered himself to one knee in front of her, instead of looming over her. "Mine by the moon," he said, voice rough as if dragged over gravel. Never by force. The words struck her like heat after drowning. Grief recoiled. Instinct reached. She hated both reactions instantly. Dane's death was still wet in her memory, his last command still ringing through her bones, and yet the thrum under her skin answered this stranger with sacred certainty she had never requested. Her pulse found a second rhythm, not heard, but felt, a parallel beat aligning against her will. She gripped the knife harder, then loosened before she cut herself deeper. "Do not touch me," she whispered. "I will not," he answered at once. She believed him and feared that belief in the same breath as darkness closed over the edges of the world and the cairnstones tilted away from her. She did not hit stone. A forearm slid behind her shoulders with disciplined precision, catching only the torn wool of her cloak, not her skin, and lowering her to the frost-hardened ground as if she were made of cracked glass. "Easy," the man said, voice close and steady. "You are safe on Windrider border." Safe was a word with sharp edges. Guinevere forced her eyes open and found the slate cairn tilted above her, pale dawn leaking across carved runes. 4 wolves in human form held a wide perimeter, each armed, each watching the marshline she had crossed. No one laughed, no one reached for her belly, no one called her property. That difference should have soothed her. It did not. Fear had sunk too deep to be reasoned away in a single breath. She rolled to her side, gagged, and spat marshwater and bile into the snow. Pain climbed through her hips and lower spine, the delayed cost of hours forcing frozen muscles beyond failure. Her palm still bled from the signet cut. The ring lay clenched in her fist so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Boots stopped a careful distance away. "May I send for a healer?" he asked. "No." "May I check for fever?" "No." A pause. "May I keep speaking so you do not drift?" She swallowed hard. "Do that." He gave one short nod, then addressed his patrol without taking his gaze from her face. "No one crosses this circle. No one scents her without invitation. You saw her claim asylum under witness rune. Crown law binds." One of the patrol, broad and scarred, shifted his weight. "My king, she is Ironhold blood." "Which is why the law exists," he said, still calm. "Would you have our oaths mean less than theirs?" Silence answered him, then a fist to chest in acknowledgement. The wolves stepped back another pace. By the time the sun breached the eastern ridge, weak and colorless, Guinevere had stopped shaking enough to push herself upright. Her body protested every movement, but she preferred pain to helplessness. The man remained kneeling in front of her, posture balanced, hands visible on his thighs, making a throne of the frozen dirt by refusing any advantage. Up close, he looked older than she first thought, not by years, but by bearing. Power sat on him like armor he had not asked to wear, but would never set down. A narrow scar cut through one brow. The wind tugged dark hair loose from the leather tie at his nape. When he breathed, the air around him carried pine resin and rain, clean and cold and alive. "I am Nikolai Windrider," he said. "You are under my protection if you accept it." She nearly laughed at the cruelty of fate. Of all borders in all territories, she had fallen at his feet. The ruthless king. The one mothers used in warnings to reckless sons. The one Cain called a butcher when drunk and a strategist when sober. Guinevere dragged a sleeve across her mouth. "Protection has terms." "Yes. You do not send word to Ironhold." "I will not." "You do not separate me from my child." His jaw tightened once, a flicker so brief she might have imagined it. "No one will take your child." "You do not touch me unless I say." "Agreed." The iron certainty in those answers unsettled her more than debate would have. She knew coercion. She knew men who smiled while constructing cages. This was something else, and she had no map for it. A low thrum built in her chest, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore, as if a second pulse had taken up residence beneath her sternum. Warmth spread through numb fingers. Her scarred wrists, stiff with old pain, loosened for one disorienting second. She stared at him, and his pupils narrowed. Gold poured through his irises in a swift, startling tide. He sucked in a breath through his teeth, not theatrical, not controlled. A true break in composure. Fine claws edged from his fingertips and scored pale lines in the frozen dirt before he forced them back. The patrol shifted behind him, the air rippling with their alarm. "My king?" one asked. Nikolai did not look away from Guinevere. "Hold your line." Heat pulsed beneath her skin, not fever, not panic, something older and more intimate than either. Instinct sharpened until she could hear small things distinctly: leather creak, distant raven cry, the drag of her own breath in her throat. His heartbeat reached her in steady strikes, and against all reason her own cadence began aligning to it, beat for beat, like two drums finding a shared rhythm in fog. No, not now. Not after Dane. Not here. Grief rose so fast she thought it would choke her. Dane's last look, Kane's hand, torchlight on fresh blood, the ring in her palm still warm from theft. She clung to those images like a rail over a precipice. The pull remained. Inside her, a thought arrived with terrifying clarity, not in words but in recognition. This man is written into your bones. She hated it. She wanted it. She feared both truths equally. Nikolai's voice came lower now, roughened by restraint. "Guinevere." She flinched at hearing her name in that tone, not possessive, not pitying, simply reverent and wrecked. It made something tight behind her ribs loosen by a fraction. "Look at me," he said. "I am looking." "Then hear me clearly. What this is, I will not use against you." A laugh broke from her, thin and bitter. "You cannot promise that. You are a king." "I can promise my conduct. Kings promise whatever serves them." His expression did not harden. If anything, sorrow passed across it, old and carefully buried. "Then judge me by what I do in the next hour, not what I say now." The line of his throat moved as he swallowed. The golden hue in his gaze dimmed back toward amber, though not completely. Predator and man stood visible at once. One of the patrol stepped closer, urgency overriding protocol. "Scouts on Lower Ridge, 2, maybe 3, not ours." Guinevere's hand went instantly to her knife. Nikolai lifted one palm toward his wolf without turning. "Distance?" "Half-mile and closing. They are not hiding well." Kane's sweep team. She felt it in her marrow. He would have guessed Marsh Pass the moment he counted missing horses and found no tracks on North Wall. She had minutes, maybe less, before diplomacy became pursuit. Nikolai rose in a single fluid motion and offered her his forearm, elbow bent, formal as a court bow. "You can stand on your own, or you can use me for balance. Your choice." Pride was expensive. Survival was pricier still. Guinevere stared at the offered arm, then placed her hand on thick wool at his wrist, careful not to touch skin. The contact snapped through her like struck wire, a clean, bright current that left her knees weak for reasons unrelated to exhaustion. His eyes shut for one heartbeat. When they opened, gold had returned in a brighter ring around the pupil. The patrol pretended not to notice. Their discipline was almost graceful. He steadied her without tightening grip. "Can you walk?" "Yes." A lie, mostly. She took one step and nearly folded. Nikolai adjusted instantly, turning so she could lean weight against his side while preserving the distance she demanded. His body a moving barrier between her and the open valley. They began toward the tree line, boots crunching thin ice, wolves fanning out in practiced arcs. Guinevere breathed through pain and counted steps to stay upright. 12, 20, 30. Her pulse no longer raced. It struck in measured synchrony with the man beside her, and each matched beat felt like a thread knotting tighter between them. "This is betrayal," she thought. "This is blasphemy. Dane is barely gone. I am still wearing his blood under my nails." Another thought answered, quiet and merciless. Bond is not betrayal. Choice is what makes it holy or cruel. She wanted to rip that thought out by the root. At the first stand of pines, Nikolai halted and signaled his patrol to continue ahead. They obeyed without question, leaving the two of them in a pocket of shadow and pale winter light, while ravens circled high above the ridge. He did not crowd her. He did not touch her again. He simply faced her and let the silence gather until it became honest. "What did Cain do?" he asked. The directness cut deeper than gentle phrasing would have. Guinevere opened her fist and showed him the iron signet dark with her blood. "He murdered my mate in our courtyard," she said, from behind, in front of elders who did nothing. Nikolai stared at the ring, and rage moved through him like distant thunder, controlled but vast. His canines lengthened slightly before he forced them back. "Name your mate." "Dane Ironhold." He bowed his head, brief and formal, to the dead man neither of them could afford to forget. "Then I honor him by keeping you and his child alive." She searched his face for calculation and found only terrible sincerity, the kind that could save or destroy depending on who wielded it. Snow began to fall, fine dry grains catching in his hair and on her torn sleeves. Somewhere downridge, a horn sounded once, low and warning. Nikolai lifted his gaze to hers again. The world narrowed to that look, to breath fogging between them, to the fierce, unwanted, undeniable pull that neither war nor grief had managed to extinguish. "Guinevere," he said, each syllable deliberate, "I will ask one thing and one thing only now. Do I have permission to get you to shelter?" Her throat worked around 100 answers, most of them fear. In the end, she gave the only one she could live with. "Yes," she whispered, and held his eyes as the bond settled around the word like a vow not yet spoken aloud. Nikolai did not smile in triumph. He only inclined his head once, as solemn as if she had granted him audience, instead of permission to keep her from collapsing on a border trail. "Stay with me," he said, and turned them toward the inner road. The scouts from Lower Ridge revealed themselves minutes later, two gray-cloaked men cresting the rise with Ironhold harness hidden under Windrider colors. Guinevere felt Nikolai's body go still beside her, a predator's stillness edged with command. He raised one hand. His patrol broke from the trees and swallowed the ridge in silence. No battle cry, no theatrical violence. The men were disarmed, bound, and hauled away before either could speak her name. Nikolai never left her side. By the time they reached the mountain keep, sleet had become a dry, needling snow that coated battlements and iron braziers in pale ash. Windrider's stronghold rose from the cliff itself, stone layered on stone, severe and beautiful in the way winter was beautiful. Not kind, merely honest. Guards opened the gate at a signal from their king and stared openly at her torn cloak, her mud-caked boots, the hand she kept pressed over her belly. No one jeered. No one bowed either. She was an unsolved problem entering their walls. A healer in ceremonial silver stepped forward in the entry hall, hands already lifting toward Guinevere's face. Nikolai moved one pace between them. "Ask first," he said. The healer blinked, startled. "My king, she is hypothermic and possibly concussed." "Ask first," he repeated, voice quiet enough to make the whole hall listen harder. The woman swallowed and turned to Guinevere. "May I examine you?" "No." Guinevere's answer came sharp with old fear. Nikolai did not argue. "Bring a basin, clean cloths, ginger root, mint, and willow bark," he told the healer. "Leave them in the west chamber, then leave us." The healer hesitated, glanced at his face, and bowed. At once, Guinevere expected protest from the guards, expected at least one muttered insult about kings gone soft for strays. She received disciplined silence. Nikolai led her through torchlit corridors that smelled of cedar smoke and steel oil, never guiding her by touch, only by matching his pace to hers. At a carved oak door he stopped and stepped aside, allowing her to enter first. The chamber held no gilded vanity, only thick rugs, a narrow hearth, a low bed, and a heavy chair near the fire. A steaming basin waited on a stool beside folded towels. Nikolai closed the door and remained with his back against it, several strides away, palms open. You choose everything in this room, he said. Who touches you, where you sleep, whether I stay or leave. She stared at him, exhausted enough that suspicion and gratitude kept changing masks. You are the Alpha King. You could command this? I could. His jaw tightened. I will not. When she did not move, he crossed to the hearth, knelt, and fed kindling into the coals with methodical care. Flame rose. Heat spread in slow circles across cold stone. Then, without ceremony, he removed his fur mantle, rolled his sleeves, and carried the basin to the chair in front of her. Sit, he said. If you permit, I will clean your feet. Marsh cuts can turn bad quickly in winter. The words hit harder than any order might have. Kings did not kneel at the boots of hunted widows. Kings did not ask permission twice. Guinevere lowered herself into the chair because her legs had begun to tremble uncontrollably, then pulled back when he reached for her laces. Why? She asked, his hands stilled. Because I remember what it is to have no say over your own body. He met her gaze and held it. No embellishment. No pity. My mother was handled like territory at council tables. I swore as a boy that my house would not repeat that rule. The room went very quiet except for fire and wind against shutters. She nodded once. Only then did he touch her boot, fingers careful around her swollen ankles, loosening wet leather without jarring bruises. He worked in silence, pausing each time her breath hitched. Mud and blood clouded the water as he lowered her feet into warmth. Steam curled around his wrists. A faint glow gathered in his palms. Heat called from alpha power and fed into the basin until the water stayed warm. He washed each scrape with linen, gentle enough to shame her memory of what strength had looked like under Cain's command. I should pull away. I should keep the knife in my hand and every wall standing. I am a widow with one life inside me and too many graves behind me. If I let this man be kind, I owe him something. If I owe him something, I can be owned again. But he keeps asking. He keeps waiting. The bond burns under my skin, yes, but he does not use it as rope. He handles me like I am breakable and dangerous and worthy all at once, and I do not know where to put that. I do not know who I am if fear is not the first answer. When he finished, he dried her feet and set fresh wool socks within reach, instead of putting them on her himself. Then he stood and moved back to the door, restoring the distance as if he had borrowed it and meant to return every inch. Food will come, he said. I screen the kitchen staff. No one from Ironhold bloodlines. No one enters without your consent. She searched his face again for calculation. Found fatigue. Found restraint held so tight it looked like pain. Where will you sleep? She asked, the question escaping before she could swallow it. Outside this door. You are king. I am also the reason every faction in this mountain will test your safety tonight. Dusk deepened. Shadows lengthened across the rug. He shifted once, and for a heartbeat his outline blurred, bones and muscle rearranging beneath skin with the clean violence of a controlled shift. A massive black wolf settled across the threshold, head on paws, amber gaze fixed on the corridor beyond her chamber rather than on her body. Guarding, not claiming. She ate 2 spoonfuls of broth, kept one down, and slept in fragments, waking to every creak until she learned the rhythm of his breathing through the door. Near dawn, nausea hit in a brutal wave. She barely reached the washroom before retching emptied her to dry heaves and shaking limbs. The door opened at her hoarse curse. Nikolai was there in human form with his hair unbound and a basin in hand, expression sharpened by concern. May I? He asked. She nodded, unable to speak. He gathered her hair away from her face, one steady hand at her nape, the other bracing her shoulder without pressure. When the spasm passed, he offered water, then a cup steeped with mint and ginger. Small sips, he said, not fast. You learned this from battle strategy? She managed, voice ragged. A faint, tired curve touched his mouth. From my aunt, who raised 6 sons and threatened to skin any warrior who called morning sickness weakness. Against her will, a short breath of laughter escaped her, thin but real. It cracked the night's tension without erasing it. He seemed to hear the crack and honor it, saying nothing more until she could stand. By the next evening, Windrider Assembly convened in the great hall under antler chandeliers and moon-carved beams. Guinevere had asked to attend because hiding would smell like guilt in a room full of wolves. Nikolai offered no argument, only placed her seat at his right instead of behind him. The choice landed like a thrown blade. Captains lined the floor below the dais, cloaks marked with ridge and valley sigils. Some watched her with guarded curiosity, others with old contempt barely masked. The third speaker, Captain Varick, did not bother masking anything. "With respect to the crown," he said, though respect was absent from every syllable. "We cannot anchor policy on Cain's leftover widow and a pup not yet born." The words rang against stone. Guinevere felt the old reflex rise, shrink, apologize, survive by making herself smaller than the insult. She kept her spine straight by force. Nikolai descended the dais before anyone else could breathe. He stopped between Varick and Guinevere, shoulders squared, gaze gone feral. "Say it again," he said softly. Varick faltered. "My king, I spoke for border stability." "You spoke treason under my roof." Nikolai's canines showed as his control thinned to warning. Guinevere Ironhold entered by witness rune and lawful asylum. She carries a bloodline heir under challenge law. By crown right and blood law precedent, I place both mother and unborn child under my personal seal. A murmur rolled through the hall, sharp and unsettled. He raised his hand. Gold light flared across his palm, then struck the stone at Guinevere's feet, etching the Windrider sigil in living fire before cooling into a bright, permanent mark. An oath seal, irrevocable without his death. "Any threat to her," he said, voice carrying to the rafters, "is a threat to the throne. Any insult intended to strip her status is contempt against crown law. Kneel and swear." 2 captains dropped immediately, fists to chest, heads bowed. Varick stayed standing, jaw set in stubborn disbelief. Nikolai turned his head a fraction. "Last chance, Captain." Varick looked from the seal to Guinevere's face, and disdain flickered once more. "We are risking war for an outsider." Nikolai did not roar. The quiet was worse. "You are dismissed from rank, command, and council. Surrender your torque." Shock flashed across Varick's features, then rage, then fear as guards stepped forward. He tore the bronze torque from his throat and threw it hard enough to ring across stone. It spun to a stop near the dais. Nikolai did not even glance at it. "Escort him to lower barracks pending tribunal." When the doors shut behind Varick, the silence left behind felt carved and deliberate, a new shape in the room where the old hierarchy had stood. Nikolai faced the remaining captains. "Kneel," he repeated. They knelt. One by one, they swore, to protect Guinevere's person, to defend her child's legal status, to hold the asylum code as crown mandate. The words were old, older than any current grievance, and as each vow settled into the hall, Guinevere felt the ground under her life harden from mud to stone. Nikolai returned to the dais only after the final oath. He did not touch her, but he set a cup of warmed berry tea by her hand and angled his body slightly toward hers, a quiet barricade against every stare in the room. Council resumed with border reports and grain tallies, yet the axis had shifted. Power had moved in public and named her worth without asking her to earn it through silence. She had spent years learning that protection always carried a bill, always came due at the body of the one being protected. In that hall, she watched a king pay the cost himself. Political capital, military loyalty, a captain's command, the comfort of neutrality. He paid it without looking at her as if waiting for gratitude. When the session ended and wolves filed out under torchlight, Guinevere remained seated, fingers wrapped around cooling tea, heart unsteady for an unfamiliar reason. Nikolai paused beside her chair. You held your ground, he said. So did you. A beat passed. Do you still want guards outside your door tonight? She considered the question, then met his gaze fully. 2 guards in the corridor, she said, and you can sleep in your own chamber. Relief and reluctance crossed his face in the same instant, tender and quickly hidden. He inclined his head. As you choose. High Asylum. The title was old law, nearly forgotten. He gave it back to her like inheritance. As they walked from the hall, Guinevere realized her hand was no longer hovering near her knife. She did not trust the bond yet. She did not trust fate. But for the first time since the courtyard, she trusted the man walking half a pace beside her not to turn her fear into a weapon. A runner met them at the stairwell, breath frosting hard in the corridor air. My king, the Ridge prisoners are awake. Marshal Torin requests judgment. Nikolai's gaze shifted to Guinevere, asking without pressing. Can you stand for one more room tonight? She was exhausted down to her bones, yet the word prisoners cut through fatigue like cold water. Yes. The lower chamber had been carved into bedrock, lit by 2 iron braziers and 1 moon slit high in the wall. The men from the Ridge sat bound to separate posts, wrists shackled with silver wire to dampen shift reflexes. Mud still clung to their boots. Windrider cloaks still hung from their shoulders, but the stitching at the seams showed older thread beneath. Iron-hulled blue, hidden under black dye. Torin stood with a slate board in hand, expression grim. We stripped them, the marshal said. Found these. He set 3 narrow ribbons on the table between Guinevere and Nikolai. Woven wool. Scent-threaded. Her stomach rolled before she touched them. The first carried pine smoke and leather, Windrider pack markers strong enough to mislead a patrol at distance. Underneath sat a thinner layer, metallic and bitter, the exact note Cain used in his war oils. The second ribbon smelled like her old chamber at Ironhold in early autumn, lavender soap and candle wax. The third smelled like her blood. Guinevere went still. That one came from Dane's signet cut. Torin nodded once. Likely collected from a cloth or floorstone, preserved with resin. Nikolai's voice cooled. Purpose? The taller prisoner spat toward the floor. Purpose is to prove what everyone already says. She fled to your bed and sold both packs to save her skin. Nikolai did not move, yet the room tightened around him. You are alive because my law permits one chance at honesty. The second prisoner, younger and shaking, looked at Guinevere and then away. He promised us rank, he whispered. Cain did. Said if we spread her scent through your borders and hit farms in your colors, every neutral council would believe you staged raids with an Ironhold widow as pretext. Said alliances would fracture by first thaw. Torin leaned over the table. And then? The young one swallowed. Then we take her alive during the confusion. Bring witnesses. Cain binds her by blood before a tribunal and claims guardianship of her unborn heir under old succession clauses. Not marriage. Custody. Legal custody. With that seal, he forces neutral packs to name him High Alpha or lose trade access and river routes. Guinevere felt the words land in sequence, each one a lever in a machine she had seen only in fragments. Cain had never wanted only revenge. He wanted paperwork dressed as destiny. Thrones ratified by terrified signatures. Her child reduced to legal timber in his bridge to power. Nikolai's hand flattened on the table, claws pressing through skin and then retreating. Who taught him Windrider patrol routes? Silence. Torin stepped forward, but Guinevere spoke first. If you lie, Cain dies fast and you die forgotten. If you tell the truth, your names enter sworn record and your families can petition mercy terms. Choose now. The younger prisoner shut his eyes. Dismissed Captain Varick sent schedules through a tanner near the south switchback. We were to meet him again in 4 nights. The taller one cursed, then tried to shift against silver restraints and failed with a strangled groan. Torin signaled guards. They hauled both men out for separate holding. When the door shut, Guinevere braced both palms on the table and breathed through a hard wave of dizziness. Nikolai reached halfway toward her, stopped himself, and let his hand fall. Cain will not stop at rumor, she said. He is building legal scaffolding for kidnapping. And now he has your scent replicated in 3 variants. Torin's mouth thinned. Any border strike can be pinned to either house. Nikolai turned to the marshal. Lock lower barracks. Varric goes to stone cell under moon oath. Interrogate the tanner before dawn. Quietly. I want every scent ribbon recovered, catalogued and burned in witness flame with scribes present. Guinevere looked up sharply. Do not burn all of them. Both men faced her. Keep one from each type, she said, forcing steadiness back into her voice. Seal them in glass and mark chain of custody. If Cain pushes a tribunal, we will need physical proof of layered scent forgery. Torin's brows rose in surprised respect. Understood. Nikolai held her gaze, something fierce and proud moving through his expression. High Asylum's directive stands. Do it. By the second week of deep winter, the keep had developed a new rhythm of vigilance that reached into every meal, every gate check, every breath between dusk bells. Guinevere spent mornings in the records tower with clerks who smelled of ink and dust, pulling archaic succession clauses while snow scraped the narrow windows. Afternoons she walked the inner wall with 2 guards and a basin of nausea never far away. Nights brought strategy councils where neutral pack envoys sent accusations by Raven and demanded compensation for farm attacks, carried out by wolves wearing Windrider tokens. She watched Nikolai absorb each message without public temper, then answer with documented patrol logs, sworn witness statements, and sealed evidence of captured raiders. The prevailing consensus in the valley remained fragile. Some believed him. Some wanted to believe he had overreached because fear was easier when pointed at one throne. At first, their growing nearness lived in small decisions. He learned which corridor torches triggered her headaches and had them changed to lower resin. She learned the shape of his restraint by the way he always announced himself outside doorways, even when urgency pulled at his voice. During one midnight council, her back seized with a cramp so sharp she gripped the table edge until her knuckles blanched. Nikolai said nothing to expose her weakness before commanders. He only shifted his chair, angled his body to block the room's sightline, and set a warmed stone against the small of her spine when the others bent over maps. I am present tense inside this body, and it is not negotiable. I carry grief in one hand and an unchosen bond in the other, and both are heavy enough to bend my ribs when I wake. I tell myself distance is safety, but distance keeps failing under the ordinary weight of him. The way he waits for consent when no one would punish him for taking. The way he reads a room and moves danger before it reaches me. The way his anger never points downward. I fear wanting this because wanting has always been taxed. Still, when he says my name without ownership in it, the tight knot behind my sternum loosens one thread at a time. If this is a trap, it is the strangest one I have known, built not from hunger, but from discipline. 3 days passed before the next report broke whatever calm they had assembled. Torin entered the map room at dusk with sleet on his shoulders and 2 broken arrowheads wrapped in cloth. East border farms were hit at noon, he said. No deaths. Storehouses burned. Raiders left Windrider insignia nailed to gate posts and shouted your war cry while retreating. Nikolai looked at the arrowheads. And these? Ironhold forge marks filed down, Torin replied. Badly. Meant to be found. Guinevere felt cold spread under her skin that had nothing to do with weather. Cain is accelerating. He wants outrage before lunar convergence. Nikolai's gaze shifted to the calendar board on the wall, carved phases marked in charcoal. 5 nights to full convergence, when challenge law carried maximal witness weight. He intends to force a public decision, Nikolai said, defend every border and leave you exposed, or seal you inside and appear to abandon territory. Either narrative serves him. Then we deny him narrative. Guinevere pushed herself to standing. Publicly announce evidence of forged raids, invite neutral scribes to inspect. Torin shook his head. Too slow. Ravens cannot outrun panic. Silence stretched. The fire popped. Snow hissed against shutters. Nikolai finally spoke, low and deliberate. From this moment, no movement alone. Not in keep, not on walls, not to chapel. 2 sworn guards minimum plus 1 of my blood guard. Guinevere, I know what this costs you. I ask anyway. She wanted to argue. She wanted one corridor where fear did not walk beside her in armed boots. But the image of scent ribbons on the interrogation table rose again, and with it, Kane's voice from the courtyard. The heir belongs to Ironhold. Do it, she said. The strike came before midnight. A horn sounded from the west gate, 2 short blasts and 1 long, the exact pattern for a returning patrol in weather distress. The outer doors opened on protocol. 6 riders entered with cloaks crusted white, heads bowed, horses lathered. By the time gate guards caught the discrepancy in saddle knots, 2 riders had shifted mid-stride and cut the winch line. The portcullis slammed halfway, trapping the courtyard in chaos. Guinevere had been in the chapel alcove with 1 guard and an armful of legal ledgers when the first shout hit the corridor. False patrol! Lock inner ward! Her escort, a broad-shouldered she-wolf named Brina, shoved the books into Guinevere's arms and drew steel. Back to your chamber, now. They made it 3 turns before smoke rolled under the arch from a burning pitch pot, thick and acrid, forcing them right toward the old nursery wing. Boots thundered behind. Not random. Directed. Someone had mapped the detour points. Brina slammed a side door and dropped the iron bar. They are funneling us. Guinevere's pulse hammered. To what? South Postern, easy extraction. Another crash shook the wood. Splinters jumped. Brina hissed through her teeth and pulled Guinevere toward a servant stair hidden behind tapestry. Halfway down, a figure stepped from shadow in windrider leather, blade up. For one stunned beat, Guinevere recognized him. Varric's adjutant, reassigned after the tribunal. His scent carried tallow, iron, and the same bitter oil from the interrogation ribbons. Traitor. He lunged for her wrist, aiming not to kill, but to control. Brina intercepted. Steel ringing stone. Guinevere dropped the ledgers, drew her knife, and drove forward low the way Dane had drilled 100 times in stable dust. The blade bit the man's forearm. He cursed and recoiled, enough for Brina to disarm him with a brutal elbow and kick his knees out from under him. Then another attacker came through the window in partial shift, claws scoring mortar, eyes wild with moon hunger and command scent. Brina went down under the impact, striking her head on the banister. Guinevere felt the world narrow to sound and instinct. No corridors, no politics. Just threat moving toward her belly. Heat burst from the signet at her throat, sudden and sharp, and silver light snapped along the stair rail like chain links igniting one by one. The attacker hit that line and convulsed, thrown backward into broken plaster with a howl that cut off into stunned human breath. Guinevere stared at her own hand, fingers spread, light trembling between knuckles before vanishing. For half a heartbeat, silence. Then Nikolai's roar shook the stairwell from below. Not words, pure command. His bloodguard flooded the corridor, black cloaks and drawn blades, driving the remaining infiltrators toward the courtyard. Nikolai reached her in 3 strides, took in Brina, bleeding but breathing, the bound traitor, the shattered window, the scorch mark of silver chainlight across old stone. Are you hurt? He demanded. Not me. Guinevere dropped to her knees beside Brina as healers rushed in. She took the strike. Nikolai touched Guinevere's shoulder once, brief and anchoring, then turned as Torin burst up the stairs with a spear in hand. A parchment had been nailed through its shaft, wax seal stamped in Ironhold black. Torin tore it free and read, face hardening with each line. Formal challenge from Kane Ironhold. Under Lunar Convergence law, he demands open circle adjudication in 2 nights. Terms: produce Guinevere for claim dispute and guardianship hearing, or be declared oathbreaker before neutral pacts. Guinevere rose slowly, blood pounding in her ears. He struck inside your walls and still sends terms. Nikolai's gaze went to the parchment, then to the silver scorch on the stair where her power had answered without permission. He is done with rumor, he said. Now he wants spectacle. From the courtyard below came the sound of another gate chain snapping, then a distant horn from the ridge, answered by two more from opposite valleys, coordinated, waiting for this signal. Torin looked between them, voice tight. My king, scouts confirm movement on all three borders, not full armies yet. Positioning. Critical no longer felt like a future threat. It had climbed the keep stairs and put its hand on her throat. Nikolai took the parchment from Torin, read the seal again, then folded it with deliberate care that looked more dangerous than rage. Signal all towers. No one opens another gate without my voice, and bloodmark. Inner ward to lock pattern 3. Evacuate non-combatants to the lower cistern halls. Torin snapped his fist to his chest and moved. Guinevere stepped into Nikolai's path before he could turn away. He wants me moving in fear. If I vanish into the sanctuary, he wins the story. He already struck inside my walls, Nikolai said, voice scraped raw. I am done letting him choose terrain. Another horn split the night. Closer this time, followed by the heavy percussion of rams striking the outer gate. The whole keep shuddered. Dust sifted from the stair arch. Brina, half conscious now, caught Guinevere's wrist and pressed once in warning before healers carried her down. Nikolai looked from Brina's blood on the stone to the silver scorch mark from Guinevere's sudden power. His gaze sharpened with an assessment that included risk, law, and the bond between them all at once. Come with me. They descended through corridors choked with smoke and shouted orders. Twice, Windrider guards challenged them with passwords that had changed since dusk. Twice, Nikolai answered with new countersigns. At the war balcony overlooking the West Court, Guinevere saw Kane's next move unfold in brutal clarity. Not a full siege. Not yet. Small strike teams in mixed cloaks hit 3 points at once. Enough violence to force overreaction and enough restraint to claim afterward that Windrider had attacked first. In the center of the chaos stood a single rider beyond arrow range, black banner lifted high. He wore iron-hulled mail over ceremonial fur, helmet off despite the sleet, pale hair plastered to his temples like wet rope. Even at distance, Kane's posture radiated command built on contempt. He shouted through a speaking horn, Nikolai Windrider, produce the widow now and answer challenge under moon law, or every farm between your ridge and mine burns before dawn. Archers on Nikolai's wall drew. He lifted one hand and they held. Kane turned the horn toward the balcony. Guinevere, hear me. You still have value if you walk. Refuse, and I take the value from what remains. The words landed like old poison in a fresh wound. Guinevere felt nausea rise, then harden into something colder. Kane had not changed. He had only refined the same logic into legal language and public theater. Nikolai's canines lengthened before he forced them back. He is baiting a strike in front of witnesses. Then stop giving him witnesses he controls, she said. A crossbow twanged from a roofline to their left. The bolt shattered against the parapet inches from Guinevere's shoulder, head packed with sleeping resin. Abduction, not execution. Nikolai pulled her behind stone and roared for the sniper team. Windrider wolves leapt across slate roofs in pursuit as flames bloomed in a hayyard below. Initial chaos became structured danger within breaths. Torin returned with soot on his cheek and a bloodied map tube. West Postern recovered. 2 traitors dead, 1 captured. We intercepted this from Kane's courier pack. He unrolled a legal writ stamped by 3 minor councils. He has pre-signed witness support for emergency guardianship review. If Guinevere does not appear, they can still convene and issue provisional custody under absentee doctrine. Guinevere stared at the text until the letters steadied. That had always been the crux. Not simply taking her child by force, but laundering theft through ritual and record. I am standing in smoke with stone under my palms and a life under my heart, and every man who has tried to rule me has called control by a prettier name: protection, stability, legacy. The words change. The hand around my throat does not. If I hide now, I become his evidence. If I run now, I become his proof. Fear says fold small and survive one more night. Instinct says strike where law can see. I do not owe Kane's silence. I do not owe this valley my disappearance. I owe my daughter a world where no one can file paperwork and call her property. She lifted her head. Open the lower causeway. Nikolai turned to her, disbelief and dread colliding in his eyes. No. Yes. He challenged under moon law in public range. I answer in public range. At the standing stones, with both armies present and neutral scribes summoned from the ridge tower. He wants you in the circle. He wants me hidden or hysterical. I can give him neither. For a stretched heartbeat, only battle noise filled the balcony. Steel on stone, horses screaming, the crackle of wet timber burning. Then Nikolai stepped close enough that she felt his breath in the cold air, but he did not touch her. If we do this, he said, each word measured, you set every term you can. I break any term that puts you in direct grab range. You will not enter that circle unless I call you, she answered. This has to be my claim. His jaw flexed. He hated it. He understood it. Then I stand at the boundary and obey your voice, even if it tears me apart. Nikolai snapped into motion without breaking eye contact. Torin, North and East Towers, signal neutral call under Moon Law Article 7. Bring ridge scribes with witness seals. Open lower causeway in staggered ranks. Shield wall around the high asylum, no one inside arm's reach without her leave. Torin was already moving, barking orders down the stairwell. Horn codes shifted across the keep. Answering fires sprang to life along the ridge. Guinevere descended between blood-guard lines as gates groaned, and the valley path filled with torchlight. Under a moon dragging itself through storm clouds, the standing stones above the west valley blazed with torchlight and gathered wolves. Windrider ranks held the north arc. Ironhold forces held the south, though their formation looked uncertain at the edges where Kane's forged narratives had begun to crack. Neutral envoys clustered on raised platforms with tablets and wax seals, faces pale, eager, wary. Guinevere walked the center path in a dark cloak clasped at her throat with Diane's broken signet. Her pregnancy was visible beneath layered wool. She did not hide it. Murmurs followed her like wind through dry reeds. At the outer ring she stopped and raised both hands. I invoke Ironhold Widow's right, she said, voice carrying farther than she expected. Proof combat by bloodline memory before Moon Witness. Contestant Kane Ironhold, answer if you deny. Kane strode forward with a smile that never touched his eyes. I deny nothing except your standing to speak for lines you failed to preserve. Guinevere stepped into the circle first. Then stand and be measured. She drew her knife, sliced her palm, and pressed blood and signet to the central stone. For one breath nothing happened. Then silver glyph fire erupted along carved channels, racing from stone to stone until the entire ring shone like frozen lightning. Gasps tore through both armies. The fire rose into images above the circle, hard-edged and undeniable. Dane turning at a voice behind him, Kane's blade driving forward under torchlight, elders watching, doing nothing. The memory held for 7 devastating heartbeats before collapsing into sparks. Kane's composure fractured. Forgery. Blood memory cannot be forged through witness stone, called an elderly neutral scribe from the platform, voice shaking but loud. Record stands. Kane pivoted to bolt toward his line. Guinevere thrust her bleeding hand forward, and the power that had flickered in the stairwell answered in full. Silver chainlight snapped from glyph to glyph, sealing the circumference in a humming ring that threw Kane back on contact. He hit the barrier and reeled, eyes wide at the force now coiled around him. Circle locked, she said. No withdrawal. Panic rippled through Ironhold's front rank. Some stepped back from Kane, some lowered weapons. Kane snarled and shifted, body surging into war form in a cascade of muscle and fur, larger than any natural wolf, shoulders ridged with old scars and fresh ambition. He lunged across the circle straight at Guinevere's throat. She moved before fear could root her. Low pivot, left step, the same drill Dane had burned into her feet. Kane's weight overshot by half a stride. Guinevere drove her knife into the old shoulder wound Dane had once opened in border combat, exactly where scar tissue pulled tight over joint and tendon. Cain roared, twisting, but the blade lodged deep enough to stall his second strike. Now, she said, not to the crowd, but to Nikolai. Nikolai crossed the boundary only when her word landed. The chain light parted for him and sealed behind. He faced Cain with murder in his posture and law in his voice. Cain Ironhold, surrender for open judgment. I offer this once. Cain spat blood and hate at their feet. His human voice tore through the wolf's snarl. You were always a vessel, never an heir. Guinevere held the knife where it pinned him and met his gaze without flinching. I carried life, while you carried cowardice. Cain ripped free with a wet wrench, leaving the blade behind, and launched again. This time at Nikolai. The clash was fast, brutal, and terrifyingly clean. Nikolai took the first impact on his forearm, turned with it, and drove an alpha strike into Cain's spine with a crack that echoed off stone. Cain collapsed to one knee, still trying to rise, still trying to bite. Nikolai seized his throat in both hands, held him for one suspended instant under moon witness, and ended him with a single decisive tear that left no doubt and no spectacle. Silence slammed down over the valley. Cain's body hit the glyph-lit stone and did not move again. For 3 breaths, no one on either side did anything at all. Then an Ironhold captain dropped to his knees facing Guinevere, fist to chest. Another followed. Then a row. Then the rest of Cain's wolves, one after another, bowed first to her, and only then turned to Nikolai. The chain light dimmed to a soft silver pulse around the circle's edge. Torin entered with marshals and neutral scribes, voice formal as he read for record. Cain Ironhold, claimant by coercive guardianship, is dead under lawful challenge witness after refusal of surrender. Blood memory evidence entered, circle lock acknowledged, succession dispute voided. Guinevere stood in the center with blood cooling on her palm and moonlight on her face, shaking hard now that danger had passed. Nikolai stepped to her side but waited, hands open until she nodded once. Only then did he wrap his cloak around her shoulders. Beyond the stones, the first hint of pre-dawn gray touched the eastern ridge, and for the first time since the courtyard, the future did not look like a cage. The future did not look like a cage, but her body still shook as if the bars were inches from her skin. Nikolai kept his cloak around her and walked with her to the lee side of the standing stones, away from the scribes, away from the kneeling lines, into a pocket of moonlight and cold where breath rose white and vanished. Torin had the field. She could hear his formal cadence carrying over the valley as he read charges and witness findings into record. Guinevere pressed her bleeding palm against the wool at her middle and waited for her pulse to slow. Nikolai stopped an arm's length away and looked at her as if he were asking entrance to a sacred place. You are safe, he said, but he did not reach. Tonight, she answered, voice unsteady. Tonight first, he agreed. Then morning, then each day we can hold. The bond between them had gone from a taut line to a living current, warm and insistent beneath her sternum. But he still stood in restraint, still gave her the choice he had promised at the border. The crux had always been this. Fate could point, but only consent could bless. I am standing under the same moon that watched Dane die and watched Cain fall. I am still grieving. I am still afraid. But grief is not a wall against truth, and fear is not the same as refusal. This man waited at every threshold. This man asked when others took. If I step forward now, I do it with my whole name intact. I do it because I choose, not because destiny cornered me. She drew the signet from her throat. Iron, nicked and dark, still warm from skin. Dain deserved witness, she said softly. He has it now. I will carry him with honor, not as a chain. Nikolai bowed his head to the ring, then to her. I will never ask you to erase him. The tight knot behind her ribs loosened at last. She stepped closer until his scent wrapped around her, rain and pine and smoke, and lifted her chin. Ask me now. His voice roughened. Guinevere Ironhold, will you accept my mark and give yours in return, before moon witness, In vow and in freedom? Yes, she said, clear enough that even the stones seemed to hear. I choose you. No force, no debt, only choosing. Something fierce and reverent moved through his face. He raised one hand and paused at the side of her neck, waiting for her nod before his fingers touched skin. Heat spread from that point in widening circles. She angled her shoulder, offering the junction where neck met collarbone. He braced her with his other hand at her upper back, careful of the child between them, and whispered against her skin, "Mine." The bite landed sharp, clean, a white-hot lance of pain that stole her breath. She gripped his shoulders and held, refusing to flinch away, and the pain transformed almost immediately, not disappearing but unfolding into profound relief, like a locked door opening from the inside. Gold and silver threads flared visible between them, braided light running from his mark to her pulse, from her pulse to the life beneath her heart. Her knees weakened. He supported her without tightening, as if he were holding a vow, not a body. When he released, he pressed his forehead to hers, breathing hard. "Yours," he whispered, voice shaking now. She tasted iron and winter on her tongue, turned his jaw with both hands and found the pulse point beneath his ear. "My turn." He nodded once, eyes gone feral and tender at once. "Mate." Her bite was less practiced and no less binding. His whole frame jolted under her hands, and for one suspended heartbeat the king who had stood unbroken through war dropped to one knee in the snow, not in weakness but in surrender freely given. Light surged again, brighter, flowing both directions this time, a completed circuit that settled into steady warmth around all three heartbeats in the bond. She felt flashes of him as the mark sealed. A boy watching councilmen speak over his mother, a young alpha burying kin after border raids, a man sleeping on stone outside her door because promises mattered only when inconvenient. In return, she felt him receive her. Marshwater and terror, Dane's final command, years of being spoken about instead of spoken to, the hard core of loyalty she had protected even when it cut her. No shame hid. Nothing was blurred. Their marks burned and then cooled to a deep, living thrum. Nikolai rose and gathered her into his arms with exquisite caution, one hand at the back of her neck, the other spanning her upper back, his cheek against her hair. She could hear the valley again now, the distant murmur of marshals, the scrape of boots, the low call of sentries changing watch. But all of it felt farther away, as if the world had tilted and found a truer center. "Mine," he said once more, not as possession, but as vow. "Yours," she answered into his throat. "Mate," they said together, and the bond settled, steady as sunrise. At first light, the dawn conclave convened in the great hall with neutral scribes at 3 tables and both pack banners lowered to equal height. Torches burned clean. No one was permitted to speak off record. Torrin stood beside the witness brazier and presented each contested item in order. Kane's challenge writ with forged emergency seals, the filed arrowheads recovered from East Border Farms, and the scent ribbons catalogued by layer. At Guinevere's direction, 1 ribbon from each variant had been sealed in glass overnight, with chain of custody marks, and placed in the stone archive under dual lock. The remaining ribbons were passed to the neutral scentmaster, who confirmed Windrider overlay atop Ironhold base oils before all present, then burned in witness flame while scribes recorded. Captain Varick was brought in under guard, stripped of insignia, and named as route leaker. He confessed to trading patrol schedules through the South Switchback Tanner for promised command under Kane. The tanner had been taken before dawn with duplicate seal stamps and dye vats hidden under cured hides. Torrin entered the inventory slate into record and requested sentencing. Guinevere did not ask for death. She asked for exile under scent ban and restitution labor, levied to the farms attacked in their scheme. The council ratified both. The younger Ridge prisoner who had testified received reduced sentence, and the right for his family to petition supervised return after 10 winters. The taller one, who attempted another false statement at dawn, was remanded to long-term stone confinement. Brina, bandaged and upright despite a healing concussion, was called forward and invested with a silver torque for life-saving defense under direct threat. Then Nikolai stepped to the law table with Guinevere at his side, marks visible at both their throats, and rewrote succession code before witnesses. No unborn child could be claimed as war property, proxy guardianship by coercion was void, and widow asylum held crown-level protection across United Territory. He did not read the final clause alone. He handed the stylus to Guinevere. She signed as High Luna and co-ruler, judicial authority vested over sanctuary law, widow protections, and displaced pack refuge. When she lifted her head, the captains who had once weighed her worth in silence knelt by rank. Then the Ironhold officers knelt. Then the neutral delegates bowed in formal acknowledgement. No one called her leftover anything again. By the first week of spring rains, thunder rolled over the mountain keep, and every corridor smelled of wet stone and rosemary. Guinevere labored in the west chamber where she had once refused even a healer's hand, and this time she gripped Nikolai's forearm hard enough to bruise while midwives coached, and Brina stood guard at the door by her own request. Torin waited in the hall with a cup he forgot to drink. The old ceremonial healer, now one of Guinevere's most trusted physicians, met her gaze at the final push and said, "Now." A daughter arrived with a furious cry and a full head of dark hair, healthy lungs, strong heartbeat. Guinevere laughed and sobbed in the same breath when the midwife laid the child against her chest. Nikolai knelt beside the bed, tears unhidden, and pressed his marked brow first to Guinevere's temple, then to their daughter's tiny fist. "Welcome home, little one," he whispered. Outside, bells rang from tower to tower, not for war, not for summons, but for birth. In the lower courtyard, wolves from Windrider and Ironhold shared bread under the same awning, while rain stitched silver lines between roof and earth. In the records hall, the sealed evidence remained where law could find it. In the refuge house below the east wall, the first displaced mothers and orphaned pups slept under Guinevere's decree. And in the chamber that no longer felt like borrowed shelter, Guinevere rested with her mate's hand around hers, their daughter warm between them, while dawn spread across the mountains and stayed.